Some friendships begin with laughter over a shared joke. Ours began with rescue, a moment of profound, unsolicited grace. I met Lily Hawthorne on my first day at the University of the West Coast, a commuter student completely overwhelmed by the sprawling, aggressive beauty of the city campus. I was already feeling impossibly small, a scholarship student from a small, forgettable town, my entire future balanced precariously on the promise of academic excellence. An unexpected torrential downpour had caught me mid-scramble. I stood beneath a useless awning, my cheap backpack soaking through, clutching a torn folder of financial aid documents and fighting back the hot, embarrassing sting of tears. Then, Lily appeared. She navigated the crowded quad with the serene confidence of a general, holding an enormous, deep red umbrella. Her outfit, a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, was pristine, her chestnut hair glossy and untouched, and her lipstick a perfect, glossy crimson. She was everything I wasn't: effortless, sophisticated, and utterly in control. "You look like someone who needs coffee, and perhaps, more urgently, a friend," she said, stopping directly in front of me, her voice a low, confident melody that cut through the sound of the rain. I laughed, a nervous, embarrassed sound, but also grateful for the sudden shield of her presence. That was Lily, sunlight with a secret. She didn't offer advice or pity. She offered immediate, practical solutions. Within 10 minutes, she had dried my folder with a napkin, commandeered a booth in the busiest coffee shop, and was dissecting my first semester schedule with the zeal of a professional strategist. We became inseparable in weeks. I was Ava Carter, the quiet one, whose focus was pure distilled achievement. My ambition was a silent, frantic engine, hidden beneath stacks of meticulous, color-coded notebooks. Lily? She was born dazzling. She possessed a terrifying, magnetic field of charisma that drew every eye in the room. Professors overlooked my precise data models in favor of Lily's eloquent, charismatic presentations. Boys adored her classic glamour, and when she called me, often loudly, in crowded university halls, my genius partner, I didn't question the hierarchy she implied. I simply basked in the reflected light, believing we were two halves of an unstoppable force. Our college years were a symphony of shared experience. We mastered the late-night study sessions, fueled by stale coffee and the unwavering conviction that we were destined for the C-suites of the city. Lily provided the grand, sweeping vision for our future success: the networking, the social capital, the story. I provided the meticulous, granular roadmap, the research, the data models, the ability to actually execute the vision. We spent one spring break sleeping in a borrowed, leaky tent, but planning a future of penthouse apartments and international clients. "We'll conquer the world, Ava," she'd declare, raising a chipped mug of cheap wine. "We'll be the power duo they write books about, and we'll do it side by side." I swore, in the earnest simplicity of my 20-year-old heart, that I would never let her down. Our friendship, I believed, was the single most powerful asset we possessed, a bond that transcended mere business. The dream we built together, the corporate ascent. After graduation, we migrated immediately to the core of downtown, consolidating our vast, glittering future into one impossibly tiny, two-bedroom apartment near the financial district. The walls were paper thin. The view was mostly a concrete air shaft, but the electric energy of corporate ambition pulsed outside our window, promising everything. Lily, leveraging her father's extensive network, a connection she always downplayed as just a family friend, landed a junior PR position at Avenue Comms, a firm known for handling luxury brands, fashion houses, and high-end lifestyle clients. Her work was inherently glamorous, dealing in parties, press releases, and image management. I, without such inherited privilege, fought for and secured a spot on the creative team of Rayburn and Company, a mid-tier marketing agency. Rayburn didn't trade in glamour, it traded in efficiency, thriving on bold ideas and brutal, data-driven optimization. At Rayburn, I started at the bottom. I was a ghost in the machine, the quiet girl with the intense stare, the oversized glasses, and the relentless need to prove that my scholarship hadn't been a fluke. But I worked. God, I worked. I was often the first one in, long before the sun hit the mirrored glass towers, and the last one out, running data simulations while the janitors vacuumed the hallways. I learned to speak in the clipped, confident language of corporate marketing. Conversion rates, strategic positioning, synergistic deployment. My campaigns, small at first, were relentless. They weren't flashy, but they were deeply researched, built on statistically significant data, and crucially, they worked. My boss, a perpetually stressed, chain-smoking director named Marcus Vance, began to rely on the quiet girl who always delivered measurable ROI. Our tiny kitchen table, stained with pizza grease and ringed with coffee cups, became our nightly war room. We would spread out our takeout and trade corporate confessions. Lily's life was all about managing the superficial. She talked about client dinners, the impossible demands of Ms. Helena Vance, her direct manager, and how desperately she needed a win big enough to escape the junior ranks. I talked about the technical core, the maddening complexity of A/B testing, the psychology of consumer friction points, and the frameworks I used to analyze market gaps. When Lily complained about being overlooked at Avenue Comms, I would patiently share my internal structures for pitching Marcus. If you want to impress Miss Vance, you can't just bring her a feeling, I'd explain, sketching a matrix on a napkin. You need to bring her a predictive outcome model. Quantify the charm. Give her a data point that justifies the glamour. She listened intently, her chin propped on her hand, absorbing my methods. "You are truly my secret weapon, Ava," she'd declare, her eyes full of that familiar, intoxicating charm. You understand how people think. I understand how to make them believe. We are unstoppable. Don't ever leave me behind. I filed that statement away. It was a promise, a sacred vow of partnership. It was also, as I learned years later, a claim of ownership. The first crack, the betrayal. The subtle shift in our dynamic began 6 months into our corporate journey. Lily's early success, based primarily on networking and charm, had plateaued. She was desperate for a win big enough to jump straight to a managerial role. A win she felt entitled to. She started referring to my work at Rayburn with thinly veiled contempt, calling it nitty-gritty and too much math. Meanwhile, I received my career-defining challenge, the Sterling Project. Sterling was an established, multi-million-dollar eco-brand, but their messaging was stale. They needed a radical, full rebranding strategy to appeal to the elusive, socially conscious Gen Z market. Marcus, recognizing the risk but trusting my track record, let me take the lead entirely. I knew this was my shot. This project wasn't just a campaign. It was my one-way ticket out of the associate role. I poured every ounce of my existence into it for 6 weeks. I bypassed the standard Rayburn templates and built an entirely new conceptual framework, rooted and rising. The concept was built on authentic transparency, using verifiable, geotagged sustainability data woven into a community-driven, user-generated content validation loop. The pitch deck was 52 slides of pure, unadulterated vision. It contained my unique aesthetic, my words, my data models, and a proprietary 5-point strategy for maximizing organic reach that I had developed during those 2 years of solo, grueling study. It was, indisputably, the best, most original thing I had ever created. When I showed the final deck to Lily in our apartment, I was shaking with nerves. I needed my best friend's approval, her confirmation that the vision was sound. She read every slide slowly, meticulously. Her expression evolved from casual curiosity to something colder, sharper, envy. She gasped at the final conceptual art, the sheer elegance of the model. "Ava," she whispered, looking up at me, her eyes intense. "This is not just brilliant. This is a revolution. You will be promoted for this. You will steal the entire quarter for Rayburn." The compliment felt genuine, but the calculation behind her eyes was already running. The next evening, she offered her help. "You know, Marcus will be too focused on the charts. You need impact," she said, leaning across the kitchen table. "Let me help you polish the presentation flow. I'm better with visual rhythm and impact. You worry too much about the numbers." I hesitated. A deep, instinctual warning bell chimed in my gut, but I dismissed it immediately. "She's your friend. She only wants the best for you." I trusted her. I needed her final charismatic polish. I gave her the access to the digital file. She spent an hour on my laptop, adjusting transitions, refining the typography, and embedding two powerful, dramatic stock images that truly elevated the visual narrative. She saved the final version not just on my local drive, but also to her personal cloud storage, ostensibly as a backup against system crash. She closed my laptop, kissed me lightly on the forehead, and said, with unnerving finality, "You're ready to win the world, Ava. Go get them." The words felt like a blessing. They were, in reality, the final silent seal on my professional execution. The collapse and the exile, the transformation. The next morning, I was late. A sudden, massive traffic incident had turned my 20-minute commute into a frantic hour. I finally burst through the doors of Rayburn and Company, sprinting past the reception desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stopped dead outside the main glass-walled boardroom. On the massive digital screen inside, projected in perfect, high-resolution clarity, was my title slide, "Rooted and Rising, the Sterling Project Rebrand." And standing beside the screen, commanding the room with a confident gesture, wearing a new, razor-sharp cream suit, was Lily Hawthorne. My blood turned to pure crystalline ice. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My campaign, my words, my data models, my entire professional existence was being presented, not by me, but by my best friend. She hadn't just borrowed the deck, she had stolen the entire project framework, the proprietary data, and the conceptual vision, presenting it as her own to Sterling's CEO through her firm, Avenue Comms. She had leveraged her father's influence and her firm's luxury contacts to secure an audience, bypassing the entire RFP process that Rayburn was currently undergoing. The meeting was adjourning. The Sterling CEO was shaking Lily's hand, a wide, congratulatory smile plastered across his face. The deal was done. I could feel the stares of the few associates lingering in the hallway. They weren't looking at the victorious partner. They were looking at the ghost at the feast. As the executives filed out, Lily caught my eye through the glass. Her glass smile faltered for the briefest, most minuscule moment, a flicker of guilt, instantly submerged by a tidal wave of victorious confidence. She didn't apologize with her eyes. She merely executed the tiniest, coldest wink, a gesture that sealed the betrayal and dismissed my entire professional worth. I retreated, silently, to my desk, my body vibrating with a low-grade, nauseating shock. The rest of the day was a blur of denial and internal hemorrhage. I worked on pointless administrative tasks, the words on my screen meaningless. The quiet certainty of her betrayal was worse than any public shouting match. That night, I waited for her in our apartment. She walked in late, smelling of expensive champagne and victory, casually tossing her clutch onto the sofa. The air in our tiny space was thick with the weight of her crime. "You stole it," I finally managed to say. the words a raw, painful rasp in my throat. Lily didn't react emotionally. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and turned back, utterly calm. I borrowed it, Ava, she corrected me, sipping the water, and I improved it. You weren't using it optimally yet. Rayburn and Company would have watered it down with committee meetings. They needed a voice with real conviction, someone who could sell the vision. You're brilliant with the mechanics, but you're not exactly persuasive. The surgical cruelty of her assessment, the casual dismissal of my core identity, was the true wound. I trusted you with my entire career, I whispered, the devastation absolute. Don't be dramatic, she said, her voice laced with annoyance, already moving to the bedroom. It's high-level, adult business. You'll thank me when we're both successful. This puts Avenue Comms on the map, and I'll pull you up when I get that promotion. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a client celebration tomorrow. That was the moment the old Ava Carter died. The betrayal wasn't a sudden, shocking blow. It was a quiet, cold, intentional execution. I realized my most precious relationship had been nothing more than a strategic asset for her to liquidate when convenient. The consequences were immediate and systemic. Lily, now the celebrated face of sterling success, was a fixture in industry media. My own career at Rayburn evaporated. Marcus, my boss, distanced himself, treating me with cold suspicion. The trust was gone. My projects were subtly canceled or reassigned. The humiliation was a crushing daily burden, amplified by the pervasive, subtle rumors. Ava's jealous. Ava's bitter. She couldn't handle Lily's success. Finally, I made the only choice that offered freedom. One agonizing morning, I packed my desk in a single small cardboard box. I walked into Marcus's office, placed my badge on his desk, and offered 2 words. I quit. I walked out without a word or a backward glance, never to return. The next 2 years were a monastic exile. I moved out of the apartment without a word. I severed all ties to our shared college friends, burning the last bridges to my old life. I retreated into the quiet, anonymous corners of the digital world, driven by a cold, sharp need for vengeance. I started freelancing, deliberately choosing clients far beneath the caliber of Avenue Comms. A struggling neighborhood bakery, a regional logistics firm, a small, desperate boutique. I needed to learn the foundations, the dirty, granular truth of digital success that Lily, relying on her inherited glamour, had never bothered to master. I taught myself the dark arts of digital marketing. I became proficient in SEO schema, the microscopic precision of behavioral analytics, the psychological triggers behind influencer conversion, and the cold, unfeeling metrics of performance marketing. Lily understood how to make people feel something. I learned how to make them do something, backed by statistically significant proof. I saved every penny, I worked a minimum of 18 hours a day. My life became a cycle of coffee, code, and calculation. I studied the corporate world as a complex machine, and Lily's career as a ticking clock. I was not driven by rage, but by professional integrity. She had stolen my work because she believed I lacked the presence to execute it. My revenge would prove her wrong, not through violence or emotion, but through the elegant, irrefutable logic of the market. The architect of consequence, Luminar Strategies. My transformation was complete when I founded Luminar Strategies. It was a digital marketing consultancy with no face, no PR, and no celebrity endorsements. Only devastating, undeniable results. The firm's motto, unspoken but always followed, was data over dazzle. Our structure was specifically anti-glamour. I built a team of what I mentally called the quiet misfits. Ethan, a genius coder who had been laid off from a major tech firm for being too introverted to manage a team, became our chief architect, building proprietary modeling tools. Dr. Leena Sharma, a data scientist who had been overlooked for partner track because she was too focused on metrics, became our head of analytics, providing the deep dive precision Lily's firm couldn't touch. James, a graphic designer who refused to attend networking functions, provided Luminar with its minimalist, hyper-efficient aesthetic. We worked in silence, stealing market share from the established players with the grace of a digital assassin. The irony was immediate and sharp. Many of Luminar's initial high-value clients were the increasingly disgruntled former clients of Avenue Comms. Companies who had grown tired of Lily's PR sizzle and wanted measurable return on investment. Lily was selling the beautiful, temporary feeling. I was quietly selling the entire, perfectly engineered commercial outcome. 18 months into Luminar's quiet, ruthless ascendance, I knew the time was right to re-enter her orbit. I first saw her again at the annual Innovate X Marketing Summit. I was attending as an anonymous sponsor, observing the landscape, a predator analyzing its terrain. Lily walked into the main hall like she owned the entire venue. Gold dress, perfectly coiffed, her face now familiar from interviews. But I had her metrics. I knew Avenue Comms had been bleeding clients and desperately trying to spin their latest quarterly losses. When she finally did spot me across the crowded floor, her perfect confidence dissolved into a fascinating cocktail of shock and calculation. "Ava," she said, approaching me with forced warmth, her designer perfume a pungent cloud. "Wow, you look different, successful. What are you even doing here?" "I'm sponsoring the data integration track," I replied, my voice perfectly level, my eyes refusing to break contact. I didn't fidget. I didn't react. I was a professional firewall. She tried to regain control of the conversation, her charming exterior straining. "So, you're the mysterious woman behind Luminar. I've heard the whispers. Some of my former clients mentioned your name, almost reverently. They said you're a miracle worker, Small world, I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. Just basic analytics, nothing you'd be interested in, Lily. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. She knew. She was starting to realize that the small-town girl she had humiliated wasn't just back. She was a genuine competitor, an unexpected tectonic shift in her perfect world. The psychological warfare was already underway. She recognized the polished steel where there had once been soft flesh, and she realized the architect of her professional discomfort was me. The trap is sprung, the data dossier. Over the next few months, I let the market continue the work. Lily's attempts to copy Luminar's success were disastrous. She'd mimic our minimalist aesthetic, but without the underlying proprietary data models, her campaigns were hollow. She was constantly one step behind, scrambling to replicate a structure she fundamentally didn't understand. She looked increasingly frantic and worse, unoriginal. The ultimate sin in PR. I was waiting for the final critical piece of evidence that would move the conflict from professional competition to professional execution. It came in the form of an encrypted message from David Albright, a former senior financial controller at Avenue Comms. David had been fired after refusing to participate in Lily's increasingly aggressive scheme to inflate campaign success rates. David was disgusted. He didn't offer gossip. He offered pure, irrefutable data. He provided logs of fraudulent reporting, meticulously falsified numbers sent to clients, which she had used to justify her quarterly bonuses and rapid ascent. He provided evidence of exaggerated success stories in financial filings, which artificially inflated Avenue Comms's valuation. And worst of all, he provided logs of hidden client payments marked only as adjusted fees, which were clearly being diverted into off-book expenses for Lily's lavish personal lifestyle, a clear case of embezzlement. Lily's entire career, built on my stolen idea, was now exposed as a systemic, financially verifiable fraud. My internal moral calculus was immediate and cold. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and fiduciary responsibility. She had not only stolen from me, but had systematically stolen from Avenue Comms's shareholders and clients. I compiled everything into the dossier of ethics, a single, comprehensive, and legally watertight presentation. I spent 2 weeks cross-referencing the fraudulent client reports with the firm's publicly available financial disclosures, proving a clear pattern of criminal deception. Every document was time-stamped, verifiable, and sourced from multiple independent corroborators. David and others he pointed me toward. Crucially, the entire dossier was designed to be actionable by a legal team, not merely suggestive to a board. I used a professional, anonymous Dropbox service to deliver the entire packet to Avenue Comm's entire board of directors, including the CEO and the chief legal counsel. The package included a single, carefully worded cover letter, printed on heavy stock paper, with no identifiable sender information, to the board of directors. This dossier is being provided by an industry peer concerned about the ethical and financial insolvency within your firm's mid-level management. The attached documentation indicates a systemic pattern of fraudulent performance reporting and potential embezzlement tied to a key individual. Ignoring this information constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and exposes the firm to severe litigation and loss of public trust. The evidence is sufficient to launch an immediate external audit. The long-term solvency of Avenue Comms depends on swift, decisive action. A concerned industry professional. Then I waited for the inevitable. My revenge would be executed not by a whisper or a confrontation, but by the cold, efficient machinery of corporate finance and law. The implosion and the fall, execution. The explosion was not immediate. It was a pressurized, slow-motion corporate catastrophe. The board, terrified of the phrase fiduciary duty and the potential for federal inquiry, immediately launched a massive external audit. They sealed Lily's computer and suspended her access without explanation. The news of the audit alone was enough to spook their biggest clients. Sterling, the company built on my stolen idea and Lily's lies, was the first to withdraw its multi-million-dollar partnership, citing deep concerns over sustained executive integrity. The moment Sterling, the symbol of Lily's triumph, collapsed, the rest of Avenue Comms's clients stampeded for the exits. The firm's stock plummeted, leading to emergency shareholder meetings. Lily, the celebrated face of the firm, was now its most visible liability. She was called into an emergency board meeting where she was confronted with the mountain of evidence, cross-referenced with her expense reports and communication logs. The glamour could no longer protect her. The data was absolute. She didn't leave the building in triumph. She left 3 agonizing hours later, with no title, no job, and escorted by a stone-faced security guard. I later received details from David, who stayed just long enough to see the final, humiliating moment. Lily was carrying only a single small cardboard box of desk mementos, a macabre mirror image of my own small box years earlier. The industry press called it a sudden, necessary restructuring. Insiders, those few who understood the depth of the fraud and the sudden, precise nature of the collapse, whispered that it was an assassination executed with surgical coldness. They called it karma. I didn't celebrate with champagne or fanfare. The satisfaction was purely professional, the successful execution of a complex, long-term project. There was a grim finality, but no joy. That night, I sat alone in my spacious, minimalist apartment, watching the city lights reflect in my wine glass, lights Lily could no longer afford. I opened my inbox. A new message blinked from an unknown sender, sent from a generic, untraceable private network. The subject line was simply, you. The body contained only two desperate, raw lines. Lily, it was you, wasn't it? After all this time, you did this. You took everything I paused. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I didn't need to justify myself, but I felt compelled to deliver the final, cold truth. I replied in the same clipped, efficient tone that had won me all my major contracts, erasing the last vestiges of our former friendship. Me. I didn't steal it, Lily. I exposed it. You did this. I hit send. That was all the closure required. The architect of consequence had delivered the final, non-negotiable invoice. The weight of victory, the true cost. Months passed. Lily Hawthorne vanished from the headlines and the city's social scene completely. The rumors were sparse and grim. She had lost her apartment and her assets. She was officially blacklisted by every reputable PR and marketing firm in the city, her name synonymous with ethical failure. She was a ghost in the industry she once dominated. One evening, 6 months after the public implosion, I was leaving a massive charity gala, a prestigious event that Luminar Strategies had been a headline-making sponsor for. I felt the familiar weight of my success, the respect of my peers, the acknowledgement of my power. As I waited for my car, adjusting the bracelet on my wrist, I saw her again. She stood across the street, illuminated by the harsh, unflattering white light of a flickering street lamp. She was thinner, paler, her expensive clothes replaced by something frayed and cheap, but her eyes, they were still that defiant, calculating blue. She crossed the street slowly, deliberately, stopping 3 feet from me. She smelled faintly of cheap cigarettes and desperation. "You won," she said softly, the old melody in her voice replaced by a bitter discord. "Are you happy now, Ava? Does success taste sweeter when it's mixed with my failure?" "You once said it was just business, Lily," I replied, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "You were right, and in business, there are consequences for fraud. I simply let the market impose them." She laughed bitterly, a sharp, ragged sound of pure resignation. "You always were the quiet one," she said, shaking her head slowly. "I should have known the quiet ones kill softly, using spreadsheets instead of knives. You've become exactly the kind of calculating machine you once hated. The quiet ones use the weapons you dismiss," I countered, "the finality absolute, integrity, and data." Then she turned. She walked away from the dazzling lights of the gala, away from the expensive cars and the glittering promises, and disappeared into the vast, unforgiving anonymity of the city night. That was the last I ever saw of her. My victory was complete. I had achieved professional liberation and executed a calculated, flawless corporate maneuver that destroyed the career of the woman who betrayed me. I hadn't been driven by rage, but by the cold, sharp focus of professional integrity. I had proven that competence, integrity, and strategic foresight always outweigh arrogance and manufactured glamour. But the triumph felt heavy. The zealotry that drove me, the manic, focused energy of the hunter, had vanished the moment her official termination email landed in my inbox. I had spent 2 years building a masterpiece of destruction, and now, without that consuming purpose, I felt a deep, cold void. The adrenaline of the ambush, the satisfaction of the financial collapse, were replaced by a cold, nagging restlessness. I had won the championship, but I realized the ultimate lesson was not about justice delivered, but about the corrosive nature of the weapon itself. The first moral lesson was that integrity is the ultimate weapon against arrogance. But the second, deeper lesson, the one etched into my soul by the 2-year grind of revenge, was that once you employ the tactics of strategic destruction, the line between the architect of consequence and the agent of manipulation becomes dangerously thin. I won the championship, but I lost the innocence that made the initial fight worthwhile. The ultimate revenge changes the avenger, forcing them to become exactly what they hated: a master manipulator of the truth. I had achieved everything I set out to do, but I was no longer the girl who had cried beneath the awning. The fire had indeed forged steel, but it had also burned away all the warmth. Now, when people ask how I built Luminar strategies from nothing, how a quiet girl with no connections carved out a niche in the high-stakes world of digital strategy, I smile faintly, the expression practiced and controlled, and give them the truest answer. I started with a broken heart and a stolen idea, I say. And I understood the power of the data you choose to hide. Because every victory I hold today, every campaign I win, every client I secure with data and integrity was born from that one terrible night. The night the friendship that burned didn't just consume a relationship, but ignited the cold, perfect engine of my own power.